This is Middle Class Matt from don'tbuythehype.blogspot.com and NC Sports Genius 1, and you can follow me at the same name on Twitter, NC Sports Genius 1. Today I want to talk about this weekend's NFL Draft and who the Carolina Panthers drafted. Before I do that, I want to thank everybody who came to the don'tbuythehype.blogspot.com NFL Live Draft Chat. We had a lot of fun this weekend making our picks and critiquing teams' picks and critiquing players and making comments about the different picks of teams. Had a lot of fun, so thank you for everyone that came and viewed or took part in that. And please come out next time we do that. We'll be doing one for the NBA draft as well. Now to the Carolina's picks. I think a good theme for their draft this weekend was better be safe than sorry. I'm going to use an example to compare the Panthers draft picks to. I think most of the guys out there have had a date with a girl, and she was not the best looking girl, and she wasn't ugly, and she wasn't the most exciting personality, but at the same time you didn't really get in arguments with her and you didn't fight. So she was kind of a girl that you were kind of neutral about. So you don't take her to the best and nicest restaurant. You don't really get that dressed up, but you take her out, you have a good time, maybe steal a kiss, and the next day you're happy, but you're not bragging to your friends about it. Well, that's the way I feel about the Panthers NFL Draft. They picked a player in Luke Kuechly who is a good ball player and will be a solid starter, I think, for the Panthers. A lot of people will look at my negative comments to the Panthers draft and say, you don't like that player, and Luke Kuechly became a great linebacker and made all these tackles, and they'll say that in the future, and they say, and you said, middle class, that you didn't like him and you didn't want him. And that's not the case. I think he's going to be a good, safe pick. He was ranked by the ESPN guys as, guaranteed to be, an effective player in the NFL. I think he could even make some All-Pro teams. That he could do that. So I see a lot of ability in this guy, but I don't see it to be an exciting game changer. And I think the Panthers may regret not getting that game changer. In my pre-NFL draft video, I talked about the Panthers needing a wide receiver, the Panthers needing a corner, and the Panthers needing a defensive lineman, especially a defensive tackle. Now, the Panthers were in the bottom 10 teams in passing defense. They were also in the bottom 10 teams in stopping the run. So it would make sense that they would need, corners and defensive backs, and then defensive linemen, especially tackles. That's how you stop the run. So it would make sense to do that. And they really let a lot of players in those positions slip through their fingers. For example, I talked about Stephon Gilmore, and I had other people that wrote on my video and other videos about the Panthers and said they really liked him as well. I think he's a game-changing corner. Liked his interview, liked his ability, liked that he played in the SEC. But if you were looking for more for a defensive lineman and a run stopper, which the Panthers needed, there was Fletcher Cox on the board. As soon as the Panthers didn't draft these players, they were scooped right up. Everybody wanted them. There was also defensive linemen. The Panthers took a defensive end named Frank Alexander later on in the draft. But if they were looking for a defensive end, there was also Melvin Ingram, who is a baller from the SEC and has a great motor. A little undersized, but he was a great player. And he would have been somebody the Panthers could have really benefited from having. So I'm happy with Luke Kuechly, but at the same time, some of the Panthers' choices are kind of suspicious. They're kind of weird to me. They kind of baffled me. I didn't really understand it. For example, they took Joe Adams, who I really liked as a wide receiver, and he's actually one of the picks, or one of the only picks that I love that the Panthers took. They got him in the 4th round. I think that's a steal. He's an SEC wide receiver from Arkansas, but he's short. In the 2nd round, there was Stephen Hill, Alshon Jeffrey, and Ruben Randall, the last two being from the SEC, and both 6'3", 215, 225 pound kind of receivers. That's a big target the Panthers need. Now I know they have tight ends, but they already have Steve Smith, the small, speedy receiver, and they drafted another small, speedy receiver. So I wasn't really sure why they didn't draft a big receiver. But even if I like Joe Adams, so I'll forget that, even though that's a little weird. They took an offensive lineman in the 2nd round. And this was the pick that really baffled, it seemed to me, most Panther fans. Now, we don't go to the combines and see these guys play, especially a guy from a little Division III school. like this guy was from, really small school. I believe it was Division III. We don't get to see those kind of guys play. But he wasn't even that big of an offensive lineman. He was 6'3", a little over 300 pounds. He wasn't one of these huge specimens. Clearly they knew something I didn't know, but I didn't really understand picking that player from Midwestern State. That was a little weird to me. So I'm trying to figure out exactly why they did that, but they did take an offensive lineman, and there was defensive tackles on the board. So I was wondering why they didn't take a defensive tackle. That was the first question. And there were some good ones. Devon Steele, from Penn State, who people raved about, and Jarrell Worthy, who the Packers drafted. And you know if the Packers drafted him, he's probably going to be good. The Packers are pretty good at drafting players. So but let's say that they wanted an offensive lineman. That's what they needed. They had some injuries, and they lost some people in the offseason, so I understand taking that. I couldn't understand why they didn't take Cordy Glenn from UGA. He played in the SEC. He's 6'6", 350 pounds. Huge. Can play tackle and guard. I didn't really understand that. So I didn't understand taking an offensive lineman, and at the same time I didn't understand when they did take one why they did that. So had a lot of questions about the Panthers picks. But like I said, I really feel like they keep it safe. The Panthers want to take solid players who are good, of good people of character, which you won't. But sometimes you have to take a chance. You know, kids make mistakes in college. You have to take a chance. And there was some off-field trouble with some of these other guys we were talking about. But I believe they were game changers. But what they did is the Panthers kept it safe. I have a friend from down in Georgia, down in the Deep South, and he always says you don't want to tie, and because tying a ball game is like kissing your sister. Well, I felt like the Panthers kissed their sister. They made some efforts to fill the gaps from last year. They had some linebacker injuries, some offensive lineman injuries and losses, and they wanted to have those players because they were thinking if we had our linebackers last year and if we had our offensive line intact, we probably, as the Panthers, would win, 9 or 10 games. But the problem is, if you're going backwards in the NFC, or if you're not going forwards, you're going backwards. So you have to get better every year. The NFC is going to be brutal this year. It's going to be incredible, especially when you look at one division having Green Bay, the Chicago Bears, and Detroit. Those three teams could probably take on the best three teams in the AFC. So the Panthers did things to maintain being good, but they really didn't do anything to improve themselves and become a great team. They make good moves, but not great moves. Very safe moves. So it's kind of frustrating as a Panther fan. I wrote someone and said it was tough being a Panther fan this weekend, but I'll see you next time. This is Middle Class Matt from don'tbuythehype.blogspot.com.